It's my absolute pleasure to introduce Lilit Garibyan, who is an assistant professor. I don't know why you're not associate or full professor already. I'll have to speak to the guys there, to David. Actually you did your undergraduate here at UCLA?
UCLA, yes.
I think so.
Yes,
So you're a local girl.
Yeah.
Where were you born?
Glendale. Well, I was born in Armenia.
Oh,
I was almost
really?
13 when my family moved to
Really?
Glendale, California.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. That's wonderful. So anyway, UCLA, and then you went straight to Harvard, I think,
Yes.
for medical school.
And PhD.
And PhD, and now she's with the Department of Dermatology, which of course is a fantastic department. If you think about what happens at Harvard, Wellman, it's got this great history of people who have just made such a difference. And you know, from my point of view, I largely see all the procedural stuff that comes out from Rox and Dita and Lilit and all that group there. So today, however, she's going to talk about something a little bit different that is going to be empowering for us all. And one of the reasons I want to record this talk today is because I want to be able to spread it out to our colleagues in education throughout the institution, because I think it has some great significance for the future. With that, Lilit, I welcome you to the program.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Dr. Zachary. I want to thank Dr. Zachary and Dr. Kelly for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here to speak to all of you about our Magic Wand initiative, empowering clinicians to lead problem-based innovation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by giving you some general background on innovation in general, and then tell you about what role clinicians should play in innovation, then talk about our Magic Wand program and some of the measurable successes we've achieved, and then end by telling you a little bit what you could do now if you're a clinician who's interested in getting involved in innovation. So I have no conflict of interest. So what is innovation? Right? What's the definition of innovation? Innovation is the idea, it's the process of creating an idea or an object to solve a problem. It actually adds value to the world by expanding on an already existing idea or invention. So a lot of times people think that innovation and invention are the same thing, but they're really not. Because invention in and of itself is really nothing that adds value unless you find somebody or some entity to commercialize that, right? So that's an important distinction, because idea or an object on its own means nothing. You could have hundreds of patents, but if none of it has been actually used to commercialize or make a product, it means so over at MIT, they love equations, right? So they define everything by equations, and this is the equation that they use to define innovation. Innovation equals to invention times commercialization. Notice that it's an actual product, not additive, which means that without commercialization, if commercialization is zero, your invention is nothing. It's not an innovation. And biomedical innovation specifically involves medicine. So what is commercialization, you might ask? Commercialization is actually the process of introducing a new product or production method to the general market. Commercialization is the only way that your invention could actually be brought back to the patients as a product that they could use, right? Without commercialization, your idea, your technology, your invention has no value. So universities don't commercialize product. I think that's really important, because I don't know about you, but I've never ordered anything that I've opened to use for patients that has said made at Harvard or made at UC Irvine. It's a really important point that once you understand that, you realize what an important role industry plays, right? Industry is the only entity or organization that actually commercializes products and allows them to come back to your patient. And you know, I hope you really understand these two slides, because it took me over 10 years of being at Harvard to really understand the important role that industry plays. I've been in academia my whole life, and Usually when you're in academia, they always make you think, oh, industry, that's the dark and evil side. We should stay away from them. You know, true academicians don't get involved with industry. And I've actually changed my views towards that after working with Rox and being a resident postdoctoral fellow and now faculty in his lab. And I hope that I could show you that, you know, together, working together, academia and industries, and focusing on the common goals that we actually have could help us make better, innovative treatments and products for our patients. Of course, we do have different views on things. We have different roles we play. We have different priorities. But I do think that academia and industry actually do have also common goals. And it's by focusing on those common goals of wanting to help patients, can we actually forge a community or biomedical innovation village to work together to bring new innovative products to our patients. So who are the players of biomedical innovation? I've listed some of the players that you always come across when you look at this topic. Of course, these are generalizations, but I want to give you some idea of what are the roles that they play and what their goals really are. So number one is academia, right? That's where biomedical invention typically happens, and the goal for academia is to actually hire people that are curious to study diseases, solutions, make inventions, and what they're interested in is just creating new knowledge and taking care of patients. Now, NIH and the government, on the other hand, they usually provide the initial funding, like very early on, for the research and discovery, and their goal is to fund the next breakthrough discovery, right, in understanding diseases. Venture capital and investors, they provide the funding for the later stages of innovation, the commercialization part of things, and their goal is really to make money. Industry is the entity that brings product to the market, and their goal is also obviously to make money so they could exist, but I think they also want to help patients, because if they make a product that has no use or is not helping any patient, then they don't do well as for their goal of making money. Regulatory, which typically people think of FDA, approves the entry of the product for patient use. And their goal is to kind of protect the health of the public by ensuring that whatever they're approving is safe, effective, and secure, and so usually drugs, devices, and technologies. And lastly, patients are the users of those products, and they're the beneficiary of this. Obviously, they're invested in it too because they want to get better. So those were the players, and this is the process of biomedical innovation. I've tried to simplify it because it is a really complex process, and I've broken it down into two categories, right? You have the technical stream and the financial stream. Technical stream is the part that really focuses on bringing the invention to the market, and the financial stream provides the funding for that process, right? So you start with a discovery, which then becomes an invention, and if you're lucky and it's something completely new, you could get a patent, which is really important, and then you go on to early development of your idea. And if that works, then you move on to the next stage, which is the clinical proof of concept studies. After that, if that works even better, you move on to late development. And then, that's where usually gets picked up by industry or a company or somebody to then go on and take it through the regulatory approval and commercialization. So initially, as you could see, it's usually NIH or some sort of governmental grant or some family funds that provide that early funding because it's very risky at that point. Then you go on and investors and venture capital come in and provide some of the later stages of funding, because the more you move on towards commercialization, the more expensive the process gets, so you really need funding. So you could see from this slide that this is a very lengthy process. There's a lot of complexity in it. It's unknown whether something's going to work or not. So this is why I really think that academia should really kind of create this biomedical village where all these players can kind of interact more freely together to more effectively and efficiently bring new technology and innovation for our patients. Now, where do the clinicians fit in all this that I've just told you about? Clinicians would typically be under academia because they're there taking care of patients. I mean, if you ask me, I think they play a very big role in biomedical innovation that is not as recognized, and it's pretty much untapped. And that's what I'm going to try to talk to you about. Clinicians are the only players in that innovation pathway whose primary goal and role is exactly the same, right? They want to improve the health of the patients. That's their role, that's their goal. Not only that, but they also have very deep understanding of the problems that face the patients. They're like at the front lines of knowing what's going on with the patients, what are their problems, what are the pre-existing treatments now and why do they not work, and how would a new solution really fit in. So they're the end users of a lot of those solutions. So all these are really, really important points that I hope you understand and appreciate, because they will allow for the development of more efficient and effective treatments. If you understand what's going on, then you make a treatment that really works. And this is why I think clinicians play a very important role in this process. So what are the barriers? So why aren't more clinicians involved in problem-based innovation? Well, there are a lot of barriers, and I've tried to list some of the top ones. I think lack of knowledge and understanding of the whole process of innovation is one of the big ones. I mean, me personally, I didn't understand all this until I was a postdoc, right? I don't know how many of you in this room could have drawn out that process, but a lot of times we don't know, the laser that you're using in your clinic to treat patients, I mean, do you really know what were the steps for that to really get there, how many years it took and the work behind it? And I think once you understand and learn it, you'll have a better appreciation of not only the company or the industry that makes it, but also the people who did the work, And also there's lack of support for clinicians, right, and access to some of the tools and know-how. As you know, technology in sciences changes all the time. I did a PhD 10 years ago, and some of the technologies used then is not used anymore because there's newer and better ways of doing things. So as a clinician, we don't a lot of times have access to those tools and knowledge. Increasing administrative burden and no protected time, right? I mean, as you could see, things take time. So if you're like being forced to see more and more patients, you're not going to have time to do some of the work that's needed to do innovation. And there's also misalignment of some of the incentives. When I was interviewing for jobs, a lot of times they're either looking for pure clinicians who's going to come in and do 3 or 4 days of full clinic, or they're looking for somebody who does traditional basic science research. So, we'll pay you for half a day of clinic, and then you go figure out a way of getting some of the grants you need. And if you're not one of those typical NIH basic science researchers, sometimes it's hard to get that funding, because I think people are still trying to understand what translational and innovative research is, and I hope that changes soon. So lack of funding and longer time that it takes is another factor. It's really hard sometimes to ask a clinician who could make really very good salary seeing patients in the clinic to give that up and come and get a postdoc salary to do the work that's required. So I think incentivizing that and by bringing more money to fund that would be really important to get more clinicians involved. So because of all these reasons, there has been a steep decline in the number of clinicians that see patients and use research as a tool to improve their health or to help them, right? And that I think is kind of sad, because back in the days, a lot of clinicians did both, and that's how we were able to advance medicine. And that's what I personally want to be able to change. I want all the players in that biomedical innovation pathway, academia, industry, government, regulatory, I want all of them to understand the important role that the clinicians play in this process, the invaluable insight that they have and they could bring in. So if they're all vested in making this happen, we could actually create new incentives or find a pathway or a way to bring more clinicians to get involved in this type of research. So this is why Rox and I teamed up to. Another reason why clinicians are not involved is because they're not educated or empowered to do this type of work. And this is what we really tried to do with our Magic Wand initiative, which we launched back in 2013 at Mass General Department of Dermatology. The goal was to really increase clinician involvement in problem-based research. We wanted clinicians to launch and lead innovative projects, focusing on problems that they really feel passionate about. So why is clinician-led innovation important? I mean, I already touched on this, but I'm going to say it again because a lot of people don't know or understand this, but the most important aspect of solving any problem is to get the problem right? And nobody can do this better than the clinician. Clinicians are faced with problems affecting their patients on a daily basis. They see what problems they have. They know what solutions don't work. And they're also the end user of any solution that's made to address that problem. So they know what would actually work. So clinicians really play a very unique role in innovation because they're solving problems for their patients, problems that they face and feel passionate about. So my one take-home message from all this is that clinicians, and all of you should really recognize the important role that you have and take advantage of that. Learn and get empowered and get involved in really leading problem-based innovation. And to be honest, there's a lot of reasons why life science companies fail, but I was really surprised to understand the number one reason is because they get the unmet need incorrectly. And that's where the physician could be so valuable in really understanding and delivering that message. So that way they'll save money, effort, and time, and more efficiently and effectively bring new technologies. So I encourage you to get involved. So clinical experience in our Magic Wand initiative is very important. It's actually essential because we need the clinicians to identify the unmet need, make a specification sheet of what any reasonable solution should have, then set priorities about how to test some of the feasibility studies, guide the development, and see how the solution really works. So knowing that, Rox and I actually showed up to one of our MGH dermatology faculty meetings, and we passed around this 3D printed Magic Wands. This is the actual thing of what we passed around. We gave it to our clinicians and we challenged them to actually use this, carry it in your white coat pocket, and when you're seeing patients, anytime you come across a problem that you're just sick of seeing, you're feel really passionate about the fact that there should be better way of treating this or better way of solving this problem, just take out your Magic Wand and just capture the problem by simply just writing it down on a piece of paper. And we told them, you don't have to have a clue about how to solve it. Just capture the problem. That's all this wand should be used for, capturing unmet needs. And what we did is 2 months after doing this talk, we organized a large brainstorming session after clinic hours around 6 p.m. and we invited only clinicians from our department. And we compiled the list of the problems that they had identified. We put it up on a board, and over wine and cheese, we spent hours just talking about the problems. So we specifically said we don't want solutions, we want to talk about the problems and just the facts. What's the problem? Whose problem is it? Why is this still a problem? What are the pre-existing solutions? Why do they not work? Because it's really in that process of deeply understanding a problem that innovative ideas come up of oh, well, nobody has thought of addressing this problem from this angle, right? But when you let people jump into solutions really early, that's when things kind of go down the drain. So focus on the problems. And to be honest, our clinicians, they were so excited to have this opportunity to just sit there and talk about problems that a lot of them stayed past 10 o'clock. I mean, we couldn't send them home. They just wanted to talk. And about 50% of the problems were solved by just talking, because some of the young clinicians brought problems that the older experienced ones said, well, actually, there's this really good treatment that works pretty well, I think that's great. And that allowed us, that discussion, to really vet that whole list and truly pick the ones that are problems worth solving. So what we did afterwards is we organized some smaller brainstorming sessions with the faculty who had brought the problem. And one-on-one with me, Rox, and that faculty, we kind of dwelled into more detail about the actual problem, got to know it more thoroughly and deeply, made a list of specification sheet, which is basically, if you were to make a solution, what are the key characteristics that this solution should have? That's what we call specification sheet. And then we talked about some feasibility studies and got to know what are the tools and know-how that this clinician would need to do some early feasibility studies, right? And once we had that, then we did the second brainstorming session where we actually invited the scientists and the engineers that had the tools and know-how that this clinician really needed to do some early feasibility studies. And importantly, we also had them get input from some of the other stakeholders in the innovation pathway that I showed. So some of the people, lawyers, to talk about IP, which is intellectual property, regulatory input, some marketing and venture capital input as well, because whatever you end up working on, you want it to survive that innovation pathway. You want it to be commercialized, or else it's not going to come to the patient, right? So after all that, and then AID, I'm going to talk about AID later, but it's Advancing Innovation in Dermatology. That's a nonprofit organization led by Dr. Bill Ju. They provided actually some of the early funding for us to get this program up and going, to buy the wine and cheese, to bring the faculty for the brainstorming sessions. And they actually provided some funding for one of our faculties that I will mention. So after all this, if that lead faculty member still felt excited about the project, then we said, great, then this is really a problem worth solving for you. So this is really the magic wand innovation pathway, okay, which is what I really explained, but just to capture it again, you first identify the unmet need. You do large brainstorming session where you screen and understand what the needs really are. This is really important. And then you do the small group brainstorming session where you one-on-one try to more deeply and thoroughly understand the problem and generate a specification sheet, get a list of what tools and know-how this clinician needs, so you could go find that and connect them with that. And this is done, the first 3 steps is done with clinicians only. And then only after that do you bring all the other players in, right? To build a team around the clinician to go on in completing this project. So you bring in the scientists, the engineers, you bring the other stakeholder to just give a little bit of input. They're not like heavily involved, but they just want to give their thoughts early on. And then, you do some feasibility studies. So that's how we've developed this program. And the interesting thing about this is that not only are the clinicians actually, doing this work, they're also learning about the process of the innovation, which is part of the key things that this program does, is that it educates our clinicians, how do I do this? If I have an idea about an unmet need and I want to work on it, what's the process? Because a lot of us don't know that, right? Or I didn't, and I just learned it. And so far, I'm very happy to say that we really have achieved measurable success. I mean, this program has been up and running for 5 years now. This is a paper that Rox and I published in JAMA Dermatology. I encourage you to read it. It kind of explains the whole process that I just talked about. And out of the 30 problems that we identified from one large brainstorming session, 8 of them are actually still very active and are being led by clinicians. So unfortunately, I only have time to give you 2 examples of some of the measurable successes that this project have achieved. One of them is Dr. Esther Freeman's project, and she's a faculty at MGH Dermatology, very interested in global health. And she does a lot of work in Africa on Kaposi sarcoma treatment. So Esther educated us that Kaposi sarcoma is actually one of the leading cancers associated with patients with HIV. And it has a 30% 3-year survival after diagnosis, if not treated. So what she was looking for was like a point of care diagnosis, because the thing is, like, the regular dermatopathology does not exist there. Clinical diagnosis is not great. When you see a patient, you have one shot to diagnosing them correctly and starting them on the medication, or you will never see that patient again. So what she said, with her magic wand, she said she's really looking for a very accurate point of care diagnostic device that she could just look at it and use and say, okay, you have Kaposi sarcoma, you're gonna start treatment. So we did the whole magic wand pathway with her. We understood the problem. We made a specification list of what any solution should have. We talked about some feasibility studies she could do with some approaches that she could take. And one of the approaches we talked about is use of a smartphone that potentially combined with some sort of confocal microscopy, maybe she could use that to diagnose it. And at the same time, Dr. Kang from Gary Tierney's lab at Wellman, who's a PhD, he knows nothing about medicine, was developing a smartphone with confocal microscopy on it, but had no idea what clinical application this could be used for. So knowing the two, we connected them. They got together, they worked together, they built a smartphone, reflectance confocal microscopy, which can examine cellular structures on the skin in vivo. And they actually wrote an NIH R21 grant together, got it, and are testing this device in Uganda and just published a paper on that, I think, one of the journals. So great success story. Not only did Esther benefit, the researcher benefited, and the hospital, the department, they got grant funding. I mean, it's great all around, right? I think they also have some intellectual property on the device itself. The next story I want to talk to you about is Dr. Daniela Kruszyński's project. So Dr. Kruszyński has spent a lot of years publishing papers and doing research on misdiagnosis of cellulitis. So her work has shown that this costs the healthcare industry millions of dollars of unnecessary admission, antibiotic use, treatments, because, let's face it, clinicians are not that great at diagnosing cellulitis or distinguishing it from non-cellulitis. Although dermatology input helps, it's still not perfect, right? And some hospitals don't have access to dermatologists. So she was looking for a better objective measure of diagnosing cellulitis, or at least helping distinguish cellulitis from non-cellulitis, so those patients don't get admitted and started on inappropriate treatments. So that was her problem that she brought to our Magic Wand session. We did the whole Magic Wand pathway with her. We came up with a few strategies that she could use, and one of them was the use of infrared thermography imaging. So then we had another resident at that time who was interested in working on something like this. We connected them to, they worked together, they developed this FLIR camera with iPhone. It actually existed, but they used it for this clinical indication. They published their work in JID recently in 2017. They're writing the second paper. And AID actually provided them with $50,000 of grant to buy protected time for them to do this work. And again, they also got some IP from this, intellectual property. So they're trying to make a new prototype device for the use for this unmet need. So this is the Magic Wand pathway again. And we think this is a very successful and empowering program that not only teaches our clinicians the whole process of innovation, but also empowers and supports them to actually do this, right? And as you saw from the examples that I showed, it actually does work. In our one pilot program, we definitely achieved measurable success. We had clinicians who have more publications, grants, IP, successful prototype devices from this one pilot programs. And because this was so successful, a lot of people beyond Harvard started hearing about it, and we got requests of like, oh, well, how can we do this in our program? You know, a lot of young clinicians actually wanted to get involved in Magic One, and that's when we decided to launch this virtual Magic One program in collaboration with AID again. This is more of a virtual platform program that's open to anyone across the nation. So the goal of this program is really to educate and empower residents and early career clinicians to become the next generation of innovators, right? You want to start from the bottom and just build it up. You want the young people to really be excited about this, because usually change comes from there. And what we designed this curriculum to be is like a 10-month really instructive and interactive course through teleconference. It's once a month basically, and what we really do in this program is to try help our young clinicians to identify unmet needs and thoroughly and deeply understand that need, and at the end write a white paper describing what that unmet need is. We don't go on to solve it because that gets a little complicated with multiple different institutions, but even understanding that whole first step of identifying the unmet need correctly, and also learning the process of innovation. So this was our 2017 class of Virtual Magic One scholars. As you could see, they come from all over, and we had 7 scholars which actually graduated, and they had a lot of fun working with us in identifying those unmet needs. And when we do some of our brainstorming sessions, we actually invite a lot of prominent clinicians around the nation to call in and help our scholars vet some of the lists that they've brought in, and also try to understand what the problem really is. I mean, last week we had a session, we had Dr. Suzanne Albrecht, who's the president of AAD and chair of BI Collin, Dr. Adam Lipworth, chair of Leahy Clinic, Dr. Clarissa Young, Dr. Otley, Dr. Gilchrist. I mean, a whole list of really, you know, key opinion leaders and inspirational clinicians who are also invested in helping this process, right? And so because this was really successful this year, we did the second year, and these are our newer scholars for this year. Again, most of them are either residents, fellows, early in their career, and this is our second year of doing this. And this year, we actually had even more experienced clinicians in mid-career apply for this program, and because they were so great, we didn't want to say no to them, so we created a Virtual Magic One Fellow program, and these are the people who are involved in that program. And what they're serving us as more experienced, seasoned clinicians who could kind of mentor and guide some of our younger residents in the program. So this is the curriculum of our Virtual Magic One program. As I said, it's like 10-month, and we do meetings once a month virtually, and so you could call in from everywhere. The ones with the asterisk are the programs, are the sessions where we actually have invited clinicians and where the scholars actually present some of the problems they've identified, and we do some brainstorming. And as you could see from the actual curriculum, it's not just the identifying of the problem that they learn, but they also get talks from people who are prominent in innovation, such as Rox or some of the Angela Cristiano, who really know this process. So they're also learning the process of innovation. And they have a lot of support actually from some of the people that I've mentioned. We bring in also industry experts, regulatory experts, so they could also learn about the process of what it really takes too. And, sorry, okay. At the end, what we did with our first year class is we asked them to kind of, we did an anonymous survey to really understand, did they like this program, what did they learn, what did they think was the most valuable. I mean, every single person said they love being part of this. These are comments that I've taken directly from the anonymous surveys. As you could see, they're not only, they said, are they learning about the innovation process, but they're also getting involved in bringing new therapies to the market, right? I think one of the things that they said that they would appreciate to have is an opportunity to not just define the problem, but also to kind of work on building a team to move that project forward all the way to solving it, right? So we heard them loud and clear and worked on establishing a pathway where the scholars, once they're done with the program, we could still be in touch with them or give them an opportunity to solve some of this problem. So with AID, we created an opportunity this year. Brought people from all together and spent a whole weekend to build teams, find unmet needs, and then create some sort of a proposal and business plan to solving them. And actually, Leo Pharma provided some of the support for people to be able to do this. 4 teams won $5,000 award to kind of continue working on this until October when they come back again to show us what they've done so far. And this is another really exciting thing that AID created, an Accelerator Fund. Okay, this is designed to bridge that gap from institutional research funding and traditional venture. So when you're in really early stage of early development, you need some money to kind of keep that project going. So AID has put in actually $1 million already in a funding like this, specifically for dermatology. So if one of our scholars has a great problem that they've identified and has some idea of how to go on solving it, they could apply for early financial support here. And actually, there's also lawyers involved with AID and the Accelerator Fund who could also help them with the process of filing for intellectual property or understanding how to do a business plan and a company. So it's really great. I think we're really building on this. So what are our future plans for Magic One? So my goal is to actually start expanding this beyond Harvard. And that's what I'm working on now. We want to do a pilot program at Mayo Clinic with Clark Otley to see if this really, so that would be our feasibility study, right? Does this work outside of Harvard? And then if it does, then kind of expand it all over. So I've written a whole handbook of blueprints of how to replicate this program, what it really takes. We want to continue to support the clinicians at Harvard that are still working on their projects to take it all the way to becoming an actual product that we keep bring it back to our patients. Because ultimately, at the very end, what's our goal? It's to help patients. And that's what we all really want to do. And we want to do it not only by clinical care, but by also helping solve unmet needs so we could bring new therapies and advance our specialty. So what can you do now? So I want to spend a few minutes on like, what can you do as a program here at UCI if you're a clinician who's really interested in this and wants to learn more about it? I would say, one of the things you can do is get involved with advancing innovation in dermatology. As I said, it's a nonprofit organization, and their main mission and goal is to help grow and create this ecosystem, right, for bringing marketing, industry, science-based product, and innovation to our field. So they bring all this people together under one umbrella to work together to solve some of the needs. So I'm part of this education committee. I'm chairing it this year and through AID. And what we're doing with this committee is creating resources and nexus for some individuals like yourself who might be interested in translational research and product development. And the Virtual Magic Wand program is actually under the AID Education Committee. And these are some of the members in our education committee. Most of them are all young clinicians. I think we started a few years ago, so some of them have graduated and are just new attendings. And they're all over US, and we're both really like-minded people interested in innovation, interested in advancing our field and teaching our colleagues about how to do it. And we also get some mentoring, obviously, from senior members such as Rox and Bill, people who've done this before and have experience, because we're also learning it ourselves. And some of the initiatives that AID has, for example, the externship program. So the externship program was started by Dr. Brandon Kirsch here. He did an externship with Brickell Bioscience, spent 1 month as a resident working there, and then got hired as their medical director. Brickell is a startup company based out of Colorado. They're making new topical treatments for hyperhidrosis, and they have some other new products that they're working on. So he really benefited from that experience. So he created this externship programs where clinicians, either residents or mid-career, early career, could go spend, a week or a month in the industry and really see what do they do there. What are their goals? What are their priorities? I think it's important to understand that you don't have to go work in the industry, but at least see what they do. And from locally, I think Allergan is part of that program. So if you have any interest in doing that, let us know. We could arrange that. We've created signature speaker series. So this is through a virtual platform where we invite speakers from the industry, from innovation or any other topic within this innovation process to talk about what they've done. We've invited even people from the FDA to talk about, well, what is the regulatory approval process. And you could be part of this ecosystem and the thought leadership. With thought leadership, we've published some papers on innovation as well. You could read it. Some of them are in JID, JAMA Derm, just calling more people and clinicians to get involved in innovation. Some other sources of knowledge that you could access online. So Harvard Innovation Labs has a really good YouTube channel where they talk about every aspect of innovation from IP. There's 2-hour lectures on what is intellectual property. How do you apply for intellectual property? They talk about how do you start a company. What's marketing? Topics that we clinicians usually don't encounter or learn about. If you have time on a weekend, instead of watching TV, you could watch one of those YouTube podcasts. It's great, There's also other communities. MIT has open courseware. I actually looked up, you guys do have an innovation transfer group also with the website, and it seems like they have some active educational seminars as well, so you can get involved with that to learn more about it. This is actually an iBook. It's a free download. I highly recommend it. It was made at Harvard Medical School for clinicians to really understand what is development and commercialization of technologies from academic institution. It has not only, it even has questions, it has interactive videos. You could download it today and just read it whenever you can. Again, it educates you about the process of what innovation is, how is it done. And I want to end by saying, this is actually a billboard that I came across a few weeks ago when I was driving in Boston. This is across from the Science Museum. Knowledge empowers. This is really true. I mean, it's not just for innovation. This is for every aspect of our lives, right? I know this is true because I've lived it. I came here when I was, as I said, 13 from Armenia. I didn't even know one word in English. I started from ESL level 0, and I'm here because knowledge, education, work. It empowers, and I learned it myself also for innovation. I mean, I said, after being at Harvard for 8 years, getting MD, PhD degrees, I went to Rox's lab. That was the first place that I even understood what IP was. Everybody kept saying IP, IP. I'm like, what's IP? Innovation property. So I really encourage you, educate yourself. Even if you don't have time to get involved, one day you will, educate and know what the process is. Understand that you have a privilege of being in the front row of patient care, right? Like you have the ability to identify problems that nobody else can. Even if those company, industry people, engineers, scientists really wanted to make something, they don't understand patient care, they don't know what the problems are, and that's the power that you have and you should use it. And I'm gonna end by just this cartoon that Rox gave me. He saw it in one of the newspapers. So it says, what do you think is the surest way of getting rich, Daddy? The oldest one, find the need and fill it. That's what the dad says. That makes sense, but how do you find an undiscovered need? So when are you going to tell me? She's asking that. Just as soon as someone tells me. So Roxworld Magic Wand Revisited. So anyways, with that, I want to say thank you, and thanks for giving the opportunity to be here to talk about this. And if you're ever interested in getting involved in any of this, just email me. Thanks.